There you go. And it will be available on our website, www.enniscorthyforum.org, in about 3 or 4 days, hopefully. So the webinar will last for just 1 hour. We promise, as always, that we will finish on the dot or just before 5 o'clock Irish time, so you can get out and go to whatever other meetings you have to go to, or just get home for the evening if you happen to be in France or Spain or Germany, as some of our European people are. So we have Philip Gaskin, who's our guest speaker for the first speaker for 2025 for our back learning. And he happens to be in Paris with our own Scott Foster, which is kind of a first for doing our back learning. That's two of them together. So Philip will present for maybe 20, 30 minutes, and it'll be followed in the usual format by questions from Scott. And if you have a question, just either raise your virtual hand or type it into the chat. Scott will always give precedence to audience questions. He has always done up to now, so I don't see that that's going to change. So I'm delighted to introduce Philip Gaskin, who's actually with Scott Foster in person. So over to you, and I'll mute myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara Ann. And I've got too many.
Oh, no, it is muted.
I'll turn down the volume here. Can you hear me now, Barbara Ann?
Perfect. That's very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like you're trying to say yes, so I'll assume it was a yes. So hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you all, and Happy New Year. I'll join Barbara Ann with the New Year's greetings. It is unusual, and we are delighted to be with Philip Gaskin here in Paris. I'd like to give a bit of an introduction for those of you who might not know Philip. He was with us in California for our regional summit that we had. Philip is the Buildings Action Coalition ambassador, focusing on enterprise and community impact, and he will be presenting today on an aspect of that. He is the Chief Executive Officer and Principal of Philip Gaskin LC. That's a global strategic advisory firm that helps leaders of organizations think through some of the biggest societal problems that we face, and then when they're solved, that helps improve the lives of those who are being served. Working with us broadly, he's focused on market initiatives that can drive transformation and equity at scale. And there are three specific parts to that. One is building delivery innovation. Part of it is workforce development, systemic opportunity, and community impact. I want to emphasize community impact. And the third one is creating a culture of innovation for rapid, sustainable progress. That's something that comes up again and again in our discussions. So his presentation today is on the benefits of effective ecosystem buildings. Because if you think only about the architects, you're not thinking about the entire ecosystem. You want to create that ecosystem. As Barbara Ann has said, he will go through his presentation for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. I've got a long list of questions here for you. But if you do have questions, raise your hand, and we will call on you. So, Philip, without further ado, let me turn the microphone over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and hopefully everyone is seeing the screen. Pleasure to be here and seeing all of you virtually. You know, Scott, one of the things you just mentioned there is about big societal problems and challenges in the world. And what I'm going to run through today is how we address that. And I addressed that at a time when I was at the Kauffman Foundation based in Kansas City and being the vice president of entrepreneurship, where we sort of began to look at entrepreneurship through a different lens and realizing that traditional means of entrepreneurs reaching success was no longer really happening. And I'll run through some stats here. But what you're going to see is basically a theory that we had, which we ended up testing and having it be successful, of how you build a successful community ecosystem from the bottom up, and what are the components of that. It's very important to know that everything comes down to people. So people are the new economies. All economies are local. And the work that BAC will be doing is going to have to include more than just the traditional thought members and players throughout any country and or region. So with with that intro behind us, I'll go and cover four things. First will be what is an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and why do I begin with that? And again, this is going to be through the lens of the work and entrepreneurship at Kauffman, but you'll see how it's applied widely outside of entrepreneurship. And I'll talk about why it makes sense, a little bit more of why it makes sense for BAC. And then what are those design principles of how you build an effective ecosystem. And then a couple of thoughts on getting started. Think of this as ecosystem building 101. There's also a 201 and really a 301 as well. But this being the 101, the basics, and we can certainly, when we meet again, go through more aspects of it. But first, there are three things that we saw back in 2019-20 with our research at Kauffman, is that there are traditional methods of encouraging entrepreneurship just not producing results. Even to this day, entrepreneurial starts in the United States are flatline for the last 45 years. We've had some peaks after COVID because people lost jobs and then they had to go into entrepreneurship and start their own businesses just to survive. But we don't have the data in yet to if those businesses are sustaining and succeeding. So we'll see how that goes. But it's also, everything was exacerbated by barriers facing specific populations. When you have women getting 2% of all venture capital, billions of dollars of venture capital per year, there's a discrepancy. When you have people in rural environments seeing their rural environments evaporate and people moving to big cities, but entrepreneurs in the middle of states, in the middle of countries, are having big challenges trying to get the resources they need. And it's related to both gender and race and other criteria. So we looked at it and said, there's so many people losing opportunity to succeed, we'd have to do something different. As it relates to us, and we're doing some very unique work, and we'll be doing even more unique work. And complex problems are just growing in number. That's one of the things we're trying to address, is a very big complex problem. There's stats that human well-being and understanding is waning. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago on my LinkedIn calling for a declaration of interdependence as opposed to independence. And one of the things I wrote in there was just how depression rates, isolation rates, and other things and human well-being are suffering. Connectivity has declined. The second to last bullet there is just startling, that only a quarter of Americans know most of their neighbors. What is it like in other parts of the world? Is it the same challenge? At the end of the day, we have so many people who are disconnected, but want to make a difference. They want to make a difference where they live at home. They want to make a difference in where they work, and where they live and where they work obviously are in buildings. At the end of the day, way too many people are being left behind. And so there's a similarity between what we saw in entrepreneurship and in what we're doing now. And as we said, and I say now, a new model of inclusion and economic success and human success is needed. When people are so disconnected, when they can't find themselves, when they feel all hope is lost, and they don't feel like they have agency. What we called it was entrepreneurial ecosystem building, and you can replace the word entrepreneur with just people. This works widely. But at the end of the day, it's really a social innovation. It's how do you get people to work and behave differently, trust differently, and do a number of different things to create a more connected ecosystem so that, one, people feel included, two, people have resources, and three, people can move, have some economic mobility along the way. So what I'm going to do is go through 7 fundamental steps towards building an effective ecosystem. And these are in Kaufman's, in our playbook, which is still online, and there'll be a URL coming up here soon. But this is sort of like a theory, something we tested out, and we ended up testing this out in 4 cities across the United States. The first is we got entrepreneurs front and center. Again, you can replace that for people in a community. And I'll go into these more details here in a bit. Scott fostering conversations. Enlisting collaborators, making sure everyone is invited. Living the values that your community project comes up with, because every community is different. Bottom up, outside in, thinking ways that we didn't used to think. Making sure to tell the community's authentic story, and then starting and be patient. This is a social innovation. This is new. This is a new model of economic development. It's a new model that could be a sustainability development, environmental development. So let me take them one by one for you. Here, and there's the URL. If you go to kaufman.org/playbook, you'll be able to see these in more detail, but I'm going to give you some now. So the first being put entrepreneurs front and center. Making sure that the people that you're trying to serve are thought of first in the meeting, and however their lives need to change on a daily basis. We used to tease some of the United States mayors that we worked with across the nation that would say, well, how do I reach entrepreneurs in my city? And I want to do this. Call a meeting at City Hall and announce it, and have them come in and do a convening. That's something that simple was just missed by a lot of people. Trying to solution for a community when you haven't even asked that community what it really wants or needs. So making sure people, the citizens, are centered. Second is fostering conversations. This is talking, right? Asking people questions, sharing why you're doing what you're doing, being curious, getting outside of technology and talking to people when you see them in person on the street, standing in line at the supermarket, beginning to foster conversations so that there's understanding and sharing going on. Enlisting collaborators. The initial inclination is to invite others to collaborate, right? But you've got to make sure that when you do that, it's not just who you think about first. This is the first principle you have to watch exclusion. It's very easy to exclude when you're trying to invite people into something and you forget who's not there. If it's usual players, who are the not usual players that you can have in the room? And then living the values, and this is modeling the future that you wish to see, right? So, and I'm going to go into these more deeply right now. Let's stop and do a deep dive on this and this is an example of what a large community of practice in the United States created by themselves as they wanted to be the values of how they would, values they would instill for building their community. Some of these sound very, very basic, but they're really important. Making sure you're authentic, being purposeful and active in inviting people to join, and why you're asking them to spend their time. There's a lot of extraction happening out there. Research extracts a lot from people, and they don't see enough coming back into their neighborhoods after they get asked so many survey questions. Listen openly, and if you're listening 80% of the time, you're probably learning. Any less than that, if you're talking too much, you're not learning. Basic introductions, connecting people, making sure to dream big. This is hard work. This is different. You have to be aspirational. Failure happens. This is an innovation. You got to pick it up and start again. If you make a mistake, think win-win, mentoring others, give before you get, etc. Building trust down there at the bottom. Very big in that the key of building trust is making sure you are giving before getting. So it's an example of a very large community practice with over 1,000 people in the United States created these values in their ecosystem building efforts. So I'll keep going. Connect people bottom up, top down, outside in. Sometimes it's who you may not think or even think of. An example would be in some of these efforts, I think, well, if we're going to do something that's going to help with economic development, we've got to invite the mayor first and all these big name people. No, how about you just start with people in your own group or your neighborhood, then design something and then take it to the mayor or what have you. Telling the community's authentic story. If I hear one more time, how do we become Silicon Valley? How do we become? Stop. Every community is different. Make sure you live the values of your community and then start and be patient. Very important. This takes time. So as far as, if you were to say, okay, well, Phil, what is the first step? I know you just showed me 7 steps, but come on. Getting out of the gate. And I would say it's that assessment and acceptance. It's assessing in this work that we're doing in your region, in your community, in your state, what's the unique opportunity? What's the story of your region or your country that is unique, and how you can use that as in a way to be successful, because it helps you come across as authentic. You want to identify who are the other actors in the region doing this type of work. Have they all been convened? Who's missing? It's very easy. It's very easy to forget people. We always said when doing convening, the first question you ask, and you keep asking it, is who's not in the room? Because it's very easy to have certain person. What are the other blind spots, and who can help you think those through? And what do you know? What don't you know? And how to ask for it. You may say, well, my goodness gracious, that's a lot, and I don't have time to do all this. Well, that's where the new position and job description of a full-time ecosystem builder came from. And there are some cities and some organizations across the US and other parts of the world that are now hiring a full-time ecosystem builder whose job it is to do everything we just saw on these slides on a daily basis. They get up and it's all about connecting, making sure inclusion is there, the right communication, the right positioning, and all of those things from the time they get up and go to bed. People are running their own businesses. It's hard. It can be hard to do this. So something to keep in mind is something like that possible? Who will be the regional? Do we need regional ecosystem builders in BAC around the world? Do we need them more local, or do one globally? Don't know. It was questions to ask. So again, in summing up, we tested these in Long Beach, California, Baltimore, Maryland, Kansas City, Missouri, and Long Beach, California, all different geographies, all different economic issues, and challenges and demographics, all different demographics. And the 201 part of this would be that they could go into a deeper dive of how did they succeed and where did they have some pitfalls along the way. I am going to stop because I am sure Scott is loaded with questions for me. And yeah, we'll go from there. Turn it right back over to you.
Thank you very much. You might want to stop sharing so I can see hands when they're coming up. Thank you very much for that. It's actually very, very interesting what you've presented. I do have some questions. Philip and I did discuss them beforehand, so I'm going to start with a question he hasn't heard
Good.
yet.
See, I knew there was going to be extra ones. So why rehearse anyway?
Exactly. I went to a World Gas Congress once upon a time, and I observed that you had the whole gas world coming together to talk to each other about how wonderful gas is.
Yeah.
And they were talking inside a small community. They knew why they were there, to congratulate themselves and pat themselves on the back, but they weren't talking to anybody else. If I go to the Passive House Institute's annual conference, I kind of run into the same thing where you've got all of these enthusiasts about Passive House, and I share that enthusiasm, but there seems to be little ability to engage outside of that perimeter. If you wanted to pursue a community engagement program and do an ecosystem building that brings in all of the relevant stakeholders, um, if they hear passive or if they hear buildings, then they self-select out. How do you get past that challenge?
Well, there's two things. First is the because you ended on language, right? So there's if they hear a certain word, they may select out. So language is going to be key to when you're recruiting someone to come in, is realizing that they may need a more layman explanation of what's happening as opposed to something that may be in our own jargon.
Mhm.
Because that is a problem in community building. One of the first, so those type of conferences, right? Yes. Mistake made is we're going to invite, you end up inviting everyone. It's like, a Hollywood Academy Awards function. It's all internal people. But if you task folks to, I need you to ask 3 people that you believe could have interest and come to this. That is a different approach. So in the US, we did it at Kauffman Foundation. We ran a 5-year summit series called eShip Summit, short for entrepreneurship. And in the first year, we said, how do we curate this first group of 500 people we want to have in the room that are all out there doing ecosystem building across the nation, but they don't know each other? We started with a core team of 10 people that already had trust and understood, but had a wide network of people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were then tasked we came up with the right language first, and then they were then tasked to go out and you invite 5 more. And those have to be 5 trusted people. And then they invite 5 more. So it's that snowflake type of building approach.
Snowball.
Well, actually, snowball, but actually in community organizing, it's snowflake. Because every snowflake that has 5 little flakes.
Okay, good.
But then it grows, and then another one sits on top of that, blah, blah, blah.
Gotcha.
Anyway, snowball, snow cone, whatever. But language first,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I'd like to follow that up with just a conjecture about what we're about of the Buildings Action Coalition. We actually want to be able to demonstrate measurable, real action in the field that delivers tangible results, exactly what you listed on your list. And we want to go into a place that's new, break new ground and start something. How would you suggest we go about something like that? And let me give you a specific example.
Okay.
I went to Texas at one point, and I was hired to help a company with strategy. And when I showed up in Texas, I talked funny to their ears. I didn't sound like somebody from Texas.
Yeah.
And somebody came up to me and says, "We don't call them French fries anymore. We call them freedom fries," because I sounded funny to them.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big hurdle to get past. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, it's finding someone internally in the community first, and then developing that relationship with we have an idea, we believe this community can benefit from this, but we immediately go to authenticity, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you believe we should speak with who then could ask questions for us or be the right door opener for us in the community? You immediately take yourself out of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and that can be work finding that, but it does work because you'll run up against that in two ways. One is people can be territorial, and cities are someone's can be very proud and territorial. And so they don't like outsiders, period, right? Understandably. And they want to be given a chance.
Mm-hmm.
So you're giving them agency right away, right? And that's very important. So so that would be my answer to
Okay.
that. So,
I'm keeping my eyes on the screen, so if
Yeah.
anybody's got a question, just put your hand up so I can see you. Otherwise, I'll keep going because I see a Bob wants to ask a question. So Bob, go for it.
Yeah, just
Get
a
on
kind of
mute.
yeah. I'm okay now, aren't I?
We don't hear you.
I'm
While you
nevertheless
sort out your
I can hear Bob.
technology,
The cat took the microphone, or the dog took the
I
the
can hear
microphone.
dog took
Bob.
your
Can you?
microphone out with a bone
Sorry,
and buried it.
Can anyone else
Scott.
hear Bob?
Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear
Is it
Bob.
just us?
Maybe it's
We
just
can hear
us.
Bob.
can
We've lost
hear-
you.
Oh, you know
We've
what?
lost your audio
Let's try
input.
this.
Let's hold on. We are doing our.
Are you back?
Haven't joined the audio. Hold on. Do we want to do?
Yeah.
No.
We want to join audio.
All right. Now, see.
It wasn't this though.
Yeah. We could kill that and do it through here.
Yeah, let's do it through here.
Okay. 1 second.
So long as it works in one of them. Don't
Turn
forget your
yours up.
question, Bob.
There we go.
There we go. We got you now. It
Can
was
you hear
our
us?
end.
That was your end. Go ahead, Bob.
All right. Just a kind of observation combined with a question. The approach that you outline, it would be easy to not notice how we can be polite and say countercultural, or more edgy and say revolutionary, that is. But I mean, since the Second World War, management of most institutions, not just in the United States, but emphatically in the United States, was driven to a very large extent by a command structure. I mean, it may have been that way before. I know less about that, but certainly coming out of the war, command structure and a command ethos governed most big institutions and most social action through those kinds of institutions. And then, at least on the business side, which is very much associated with the idea of entrepreneurism, the economics of our country since the 80s and Japan's rise, and the way that was driven through Wall Street, made it even more emphatic. That is to say, they found out they were leaving some money on the table, and they went out of their way to restructure the way all work is done. We get the gig economy and the absence of pensions and all those sorts of things as we keep driving this command structure. And then you come along and say, if we are going to address the social dimensions of these very big problems, we've got to build these local ecosystems. And that's going to take an approach to things, which is almost it's like taking the way we manage everything and flipping it around 180 degrees.
Yeah.
Is it okay? So that's the long warm up. Is it that you've got to do that in here, there, and the other place? That is to say, you've got to do that in a kind of underground railroad like way in order to get fires lit. Is that an approach susceptible to being made a broad social ethos, or are we really starting little underground fires and seeing what we can do with them?
No, I think it's the former, not the latter, but I don't know if I would call it the underground. It's more of just an approach of how you start. It's a bottom-up grassroots approach. It's a community organizing discipline of listening to and asking people first what they need. This is one of the reasons why community-based research has become so popular now, because research has been extracted through how many times do we get a question or a survey, someone asking us something on the phone, and community members have gotten tired of giving because they don't see their lives improving necessarily by what they're giving and giving their time for. And so just like I was in answering Scott's last question, it's about like if you're going into that community in Texas, it's like we don't know what the people even need. Let's take the opportunity zones. That was a thing in the US in the last 2 administrations ago. We'll see if it happens again. And it was about giving economic development money to these certain zones across the nation. But it was done in a way of, hey, we think you need a Starbucks and this type of restaurant, a drugstore, and we're going to give you that, and they're going to build that. When the people really needed a dry cleaners or something else. And that's why opportunities didn't really take off that much. Now, if the upside down is, where do you begin and start? If the people's lives are what we're trying to change and their involvement and taking agency in the buildings that they work in, live in, what have you, how not start with that? Flight attendants and pilots go through this a lot. When their airlines get a new Airbus or Boeing plane, and the flight attendant goes, why on earth is the rear lavatory next to the galley? Why is there no space here? The pilot's saying, because they didn't ask the people flying the plane first. It's just very basic. It's just a different way of entering, or at least learning. So again, top up, top down, bottom up. So it's everybody, but it's how you get to the voice of usually the people that are the users earlier so that you're more effective in executing and getting to the goal and to get there faster.
Let me follow up on that one with another question. How much of your experience is exposure to people who are willing to interact and wanting to be part of a broader community? And I'm thinking about two things. One is the current trend towards social media, where you see people on a date and they're planted in front of their phones. They're not actually talking to the person across the table from them.
Right.
And the other is this whole, I'm an independent Western cowboy, government stay the heck out of my life.
Yeah.
These trends seem to be counter to the proposition you're putting on the table.
Well, I think I would counter that back in saying it be the language that is used in talking to the folks.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have to say the word government. You can call it whatever. True that folks may need and are looking for better lives and are working 2 jobs and tired and everything. So I don't have the time to come along. What tends to bring them along is authenticity. So one of the frameworks in community organizing, a framework in getting people to come along and work with you or follow you, is the personal story. And it's about, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It has 3 components to it: challenge, choice, outcome. Here's the challenge that I see in the world that I'm really, really passionate about. It's affected me or my family in this way. The choice that I'm making is to jump in and do this in this work and this project, because if we do this, my life, and I believe a whole bunch of my neighbors' lives, is going to change in X number of years. Will you come along? Type of thing. So, and then you see who says this. You're not going to get 100 people to 100% of people say, "Hey, I'm in," whatever. I mean, remember what we're trying to do is get to hear them. What do they need? The work is going to be on us and our group, but it's how do we get to at least hear the people, have them be included, so we get information that we may not even thought about is going to be needed, whether it's in the community or in the business community, the residential community, wherever we may need it. And so, Bob, back to you, is thinking about this as a mindset. Sometimes not all of these steps may be possible to be followed in what we're doing. But the mindset of inclusion and justice from a standpoint of people really truly being listened to and heard, I just think is important, unless we believe we know all the answers.
It strikes me that the examples you've given where this approach has been tested are all in the United States. And that if we were to think in terms of other places, Europe, which itself is a kaleidoscope, Africa, Asia, Latin America, that's almost a study in anthropology to understand the keys to doors to get them to open. To my view, that really emphasizes the importance of a local champion to get into those communities.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same, and it's not. I stated and presented this from the U.S. and the 4 cities we tested. However, these 7 principles have been adopted by the Global Entrepreneurship Network, which is in 170 countries, and has benefited or touched over 10 million entrepreneurs over its time since 2008. And there, I was in Australia middle of last year, and there's a group by the name of Ready Communities down there that is doing this type of work and beginning the convening and bringing folks together in the interior regions of the states there. So it's actually happening in other parts of the world. The last question you asked me though about that was
Anthropology, local champions.
Local champions, yes. Local champions, ecosystem builder, whatever you want to call them. Local, since all economies are local, people are the new economies. Starting with a local champion can help us enter the market as we need to, help us meet other people, and teach us that don't come here talking about French fries thing, come here talking about freedom fries, right? Whatever it may be. So while we're going to have, the research and everything else in what we're doing, all I'm doing is bringing the other dimension of this, the community-based dimension.
I'll just follow up with one little poke and then get out of the way for others. My sense of smell is that while community action has been around, this sort of community entrepreneurism of one sort or another organization has been around, it has not really reshaped the culture of the country. Just this country. It hasn't shaped very many cultures. But we need culture change at a really profound level. And as I listen to you, I'm thinking we probably should give some thought to developing some kind of program to teach this sort of thing on a broad scale, because this is countercultural. I mean, the thing about poor people or people in disadvantaged areas and whatever is they've lost their sense of agency by and large.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So they're not the idea of being invited into a dialogue is so alien to them. They don't know how to respond to the question. This would take, and I mean, the way you outline it, just in passing, the way you outline it sounds very much like some stuff that began in the States back in the 30s and 40s. And much of it came out of Denmark. And I don't know if there's a kind of a history and an ongoing experience like that over there. Be worth checking out.
Sorry.
I was just saying, but we need to create an educational program that would help promote this sort of thing.
I think so, because we have some generations that haven't experienced it. So, in Black churches for years, not as much lately in the years, was community organizing. Or when we used to, hey, it's Friday night, everyone on the block, let's have a block meeting down at the high school auditorium and talk about all type of things. To give you an analogy there, Bob, International Economic Development Council, IEDC. It's a grantee of ours because and they've developed something called an ecosystem builder certification for their 5,000 economic development memberships. They have over 5,000 economic developers in this council. And they now can opt to take and become a certified entrepreneur-focused economic development leader through a course that we help develop and fund. Exactly that, because economic development is you talk about old mindset. it's that zero sum. Hey, let's move that company from Arizona to over here, and we'll get the $15,000 jobs, and they'll lose them over there. And they're going through this certification and getting this whole understanding of community and how much more they can be local leaders. So the education, yes, I think certification, education, whichever it is, I think it's because it takes time to understand. We had some questions.
I got smart and turned on the chat, so now I can see I can call on Amy and then Andy to either ask your question or make your comment. So Amy, over to you.
Thanks for this conversation. It is very, very difficult now to have conversations with people because of language sensitivity. And it doesn't just go to meeting the person in the neighborhood and understanding what that neighborhood talks about. Let's just take Pennsylvania. You can't say the phrase energy efficiency anymore in Pennsylvania because you're seen as a liberal crazy person. But if you said you can have energy independence, you can pretty much say that anywhere and be talking about solar or passive house or whatever. But if you slip and go back to your regular day job and say energy efficiency because you're being energy efficient, you're left out of the room. And so how to figure out where to find common language, I think, is very difficult. It's not just going to Europe and not being able to talk to somebody, or Asia. It's next door.
Yeah.
And it's very, very frustrating to try and move this movement forward and not be able to talk.
Exactly. Yeah, and threading that needle, and that's why Scott, a couple of times I said language.
Yeah.
And so our communications, our comms work has to, we have to think through what is that language. And Amy, you're sorry, I did a keynote speech last month at Morehouse University in Atlanta, and I was, as a historically Black college university, I was challenging them and saying, lead the nation on a new language to bring people along, because there are buzzwords, inequity, and other things that you're saying, like you're talking about in Pennsylvania, you turn people off or what have you. So rather than entering with deficit talk about how many people are left out, saying things like, everyone wants a safe neighborhood, everyone wants a chance. You like capital, I like capital. All these different types of things, and see how far you get. We're never going to get 100% of the people to come along. It's impossible to do that. It's how many more can we get so that the movement is successful. But we're doing this at a time. This is why this is such a bold effort, at a time when it's probably the most difficult communication-wise to do it. Amy's absolutely right.
Good. I've got a lineup building here. Andy, I'd like you to come in with your comment, and then David's got his hand up. Andy?
Hi. Yeah, sorry, it was just really a comment. I was trying to be quiet. I'll just go into another room. This presentation has made me question a little bit about this kind of this thing about us knowing the answers. Because yes, it is true, we do kind of think we know some of the answers. So you've just made me sort of you've reminded me that I just need to be cautious about that. Yes. Actually. Yeah.
And I think about the local champion, about the local champion being a school teacher. Yeah. So ecosystem builders there's I think we identified 9 personas. There's the school teacher, there's the mayor, there's the entrepreneur, there's the entrepreneur support organization, the nonprofit. There's a number of different people in an ecosystem that actually can be ecosystem builders, because everyone can have a part. Call it a team sport. Everyone, a wider net of people can have a part in doing it.
I suppose what I'm wondering whether we're going to find or not is whether these ecosystems are going to clash a bit, because there is more conservatism on the local council. Yeah. So I know that the school teacher, who is very entrepreneurial, is a businessman. He has this love of knowledge, and it's the love of the appreciation of knowledge and the excitement, I suppose, of the novelty. Maybe it does. People do respond to the novelty of high performance, of this high performance talk and the building we've created there. That does seem to have struck a chord. That sense of modernity.
Yeah.
But we haven't got very far with building this network. It's all very exciting and promising at the moment. We'll have to see where it goes. But I can see the conservatism is just on the edge of clashing with the enthusiasm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for the comment. I'm going to turn now to David, and then I'm going to close with one final question from me. But David, over to you. You had a comment and a question, I think.
And both Amy and Andy have kind of hit on it in that there is a conflict. There are so many groups, even within each community, there are so many different opinions, and they all have their "I'm right" attitude. And how to, like, my question, like, you've largely answered it, but my question started off with how do you deal with the actual the conflicts there? But just before I'll say everything and then I'll let you take over. Like, the conflicts are obviously from the bottom up. They're governments, local authorities, everybody has their idea of what the people want. And you mentioned Denmark as well as being a country, or Bob mentioned Denmark as being a country that did start to look at things, and they've got an institute called the Happiness Institute. Happiness. And I contacted them a while ago, but I didn't actually get a response. So after this conversation, I will want to contact them again. The thing is, they've asked the question of what people want. They've analyzed it slightly further to find what people need. And then, when they start to implement it, they find out what people can actually have. It's an extremely complicated process that involves education, like Bob mentioned schools, education of governments, of everybody else. And obviously that's where you're coming from. But my question was, how do we deal with the conflict?
I'll give a story between U.S. mayors and ecosystem built entrepreneurs, and say entrepreneurs. So we ran a mayor's conference once a year, about 100 small and mid-sized U.S. mayors coming together. And finally, they said, we love this research, we like everything, but you just need to just tell us what to do. Give us the 5 things, tell us what to do. So finally, one year, we decided to change the conference and invite entrepreneurs to be embedded with the mayors for a 2-day conference. And we brought in outside facilitators that do design thinking and graphic design. And I'll send some of these photos. They're impressive. We had entrepreneurs who really didn't like mayors because they didn't think they had anything about small business and entrepreneurship. And you had mayors as like, get those smart Alex out of here, da 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 da. They're just like this. So then going from that and seeing these entrepreneurs at the whiteboard with mayors, with the entrepreneurs helping the mayors think through their civic issues with entrepreneurial thinking, and they found each other. Mm-hmm. And so I think at the end of last year, there were 170 policies, programs, or practices to assist entrepreneurs that had been implemented through mayor's offices across the United States. That started because trust building in the same room, listening to each other, but architected in a way to just get them to think differently, create together, talk differently, get to know each other, laugh, wow. And what came out of it was something they never would have found each other. Mm-hmm. And so those principles of trust building, bringing people together, all those different types of things. Facilitation did help. Value Web is their name, and they're facilitators around the world. Phenomenal in doing that work. And trying to get people to solve problems in the shortest amount of time that facilitation was very, very important.
Nothing focuses the attention like scheduling your execution. So keep
Right.
I would like to close with a pretty broad and leading question, if I may. The first one that emerges from my head is, how do you define success? That's not where my question is going to go. We have developed this high performance buildings concept, which goes beyond just energy efficiency, beyond just carbon efficiency. It gets into economic, social, and environmental resilience. It gets into water issues. It gets into social justice, a whole spectrum of issues, affordability, and the rest of it. And if you do buildings and the built environment the right way, the way we think, of course, because we're always right, then we should be able to enhance the quality of life writ large for a community. If I wanted to pursue a program like you've laid out, and I do, the second one is going to be easier to do if we get the first one right. So how do you define success, and where is the kind of community we should target for a case study, not just for education, but for proof of pudding?
Yeah. Very good question, which we asked ourselves when we started that project in the 4 cities. We had to make sure there was an entrepreneur-friendly mayor, that we had grantee relationships that were entrepreneur support organizations, that there was a reasonable amount of interest in either entrepreneurship or, let's say, environment. So you just do that type of assessment first, and then you pick 1 or 2 or 3. We just picked 4.
Mm-hmm.
Originally I wanted to do 32, of course, but we did pick 4, and you test out and you see, and these were 3-year projects. They had to come together, they had to build trust, all that different type. But I would say it's identifying, and we work together, identify, okay, what are the top 10 regions we think we should do this, and why? And we established the criteria that we believe will get us to success.
Right.
And then see where it fits, and try it out.
Good. Yeah. Well, I very much appreciate your contributions today. You actually have provided a lot of food for thought, fodder for thought, and I think we need to build on that. For the audience and for all of us, we are targeting wanting to get 100 new centers of excellence lined up for our summit in June in Enniscorthy. To me, this program that you've laid out would be a nice roadmap of thinking where we might look for local champions who, as centers of excellence, might be a convening entity to start a process like you're setting out. I'd like to ask both Bob and Philip what they think of that proposition. You want to go ahead?
Bobby said your name first. So
yeah, okay.
B comes before P when it's Bob and not Robert.
I want to hear what Philip has to say, so I'm going to limit